I want to try to fine tune this now a little bit more to get to the angle of the battery. Now, the other thing to keep in mind, we've got try to think about what things do we have that we can use to make this work. The thing to remember is you're not necessarily animating this one specific procedure. In other words, we're trying to teach people how to solve this problem, or how to remove an object that will not pass through the digestive system or through the stomach. Um, and so you can, at this point, you haven't started any animation, so you can actually, an easy, or at least a easier tool to help get the wire and the battery, is to actually move the battery a little bit. Now, nothing's been recorded to date, so I can literally click on the wire here, and you can see, oh, I'm sorry, I clicked on the curve there. There's the wire and there's the battery, so I could physically just do this and make my life a little easier. I'd like to twist the battery, the loop a little bit. So what I can do is, what are my tools? I have a flex. If I hit the letter T, I should be able to move a little bit that loop. I've got a loop IK, a loop snare IK. That seems to have a little more control, a lot more control. Okay, so that's a good control there. That will get me in a position relative to the battery. You can see from the front window now, I can see how I'm pretty close. This angle that the battery is, that's a tough one. So while we could play with this a little bit to get a little more of that angle, again, we can also play with the battery, reposition it a little bit so it's not quite so challenging. So obviously there's a limit what we can do with moving the battery. We can't make it look like it would be that it should have passed. We have to make it kind of stay hugged. So that's pretty close there. And here, just try to use a couple different angles to see, what I can do to make. I want that loop. If I remember correctly from the article, it talks about how they took this loop into a groove in the battery. Now, see, and that's what I'm talking about. You may have other batteries that you're working with a mesh, you're working with anything, but the point is, what tools do you have? Okay, so we have two tools we've talked about right now. We can actually move the battery, and let's name this so I don't confuse it. Battery stomach, and this is my battery. This is the duplicate one I was using earlier to create the snare loop, if you will. All right. We talked about, I can grab the IK for the loop, hit the letter T if I don't have the handles, and physically twist it. Kind of simulate how the physician would be using the controls at the top of the scope. Okay. And then again, that's pretty good. The other thing you can do, you can use the scope IK and twist the whole scope up and down using that. And let me just show you real quick. What's happening is the roll and the twist are the two things I'm changing when I do either of these IK handles. Okay. So if we go back to the snare, you can see the twist, and I think this one, yeah, this one does the roll, and this one does the twist, right? Yeah, okay. So one's at the beginning, one's at the end, so you want the whole loop to change. Maybe it's best to do that. All right, now you can obviously key those as well and set keyframes, but we're pretty close. So just to review real quick, we've got the loop snare, IK. We can use its roll and twist to adjust. The other tool that's very helpful is the actual scope. We can do the same thing. We can modify its roll and twist. And that's going to give us the large, gross, if you will, major movement. And then the last thing you can do, or at least another thing you can do, is you can also get the curve. So we haven't animated anything. We can get the control vertices in the curve, and you can move, let's say, that vertice, and it's going to change the path so that essentially it's also going to alter where the scope will go. Now you can see if I move this curve, it's really going to point right there. It's going to have very little impact because don't forget my IK for the majority of the scope ends there. All right, so that's where most of the this point here represents about. So I can, and that will affect it. So when we do the animation, we'll come down. You can do the same thing, go back upstream and examine. Are there places where the scope is too close, like right here? See how my scope is? It's kind of hard to see, but let me see if I make this. If I turn off the X-ray, see how the scope's kind of pushing against the wall of the esophagus there, right? So what I could do is maybe grab this point and again move the curve. So now the scope's a little further towards the middle. And try to keep in mind that the stomach now, we're looking at the posterior half. There's a whole nother portion. So you can, bring the scope up a little bit more, or essentially that would be the wrong term. We're bringing it more anterior. Okay. So those are the elements then you can use to fine tune. So I want to, before I do the animation, I want to make sure that it's even feasible. See, now right now I'm in the wall of the scope. The snare is pushing, which is okay. I mean, I think that it's going to have enough resiliency or strength to do that, but I don't think it should push it too much. So I'm just going to make the battery right about there. And then I'm going to have to get the scope back a little bit. What would I use? Probably the best thing to do is go back to the snare IK here and change that offset to maybe 4, or maybe even more, or less rather. Okay, so now I'm pushing in the wall. The wall of the stomach would have to have a little, and it's a soft tissue. Oh shucks. But there you go. So we'll have to some point later animate a bit of a depression, having the wall react to that wire being put on there. And then as the wire tightens, we can hopefully make it look like it's going to snare that.